and join me in prayer. May the words of my mouth and the meditations of all our hearts be acceptable in your sight, Holy One, our strength and Redeemer. Amen. Friends, I have a confession to make. I am a little bit superstitious. It goes against all of my theology, never mind common sense. I just keep following these silly, superstitious traditions. I cross my fingers for the printer to work. I knock on wood. I never wish performers good luck. Instead, I say break a leg. If I spill salt, I throw some over my left shoulder. If I find a penny, I pick it up, and I never open an umbrella indoors. I know it doesn't make any sense, but at least our Old Testament reading for today seems to suggest that I may not be alone. The reading comes from the book of Numbers, which picks up where Exodus leaves off, continuing the story of the Israelites' wilderness wanderings after they received the law at Sinai. Throughout the course of Numbers, there are 5 different episodes where the people murmur or grumble or complain to Moses about how miserable they are in the wilderness. They reminisce about all the culinary delights of Egypt. They whine about the odd taste of the water. And here, finally, they denounce the food. Did you bring us out here to die? They ask. There's no food and no water, and we detest this wretched bread. Well, wait, which is it? Is there none, or do they just not like it? Either way, no sooner do they complain than poisonous serpents appear among them, which the text says are sent from God. Are they really sent from God? Well, that depends on your understanding of the Bible and your theodicy, which is the term for the area of theology that tries to reconcile the existence of suffering in the world with faith in an all-knowing, all-loving, all-powerful God. Does God give people cancer and heart disease and HIV? Does God send hurricanes and tsunamis and earthquakes? Does God prevent people from having access to clean water or safe shelter or adequate health care? If God does cause those things, why? To punish? To test? To teach? Is it God's way of saying enough is enough? And if that is not God's action, then where do those realities come from? One of my most important lessons in theodicy came during my work as a hospital chaplain intern in the clinical pastoral education program. All of us seminarians were sitting in the office and we were talking theodicy and throwing around fancy theological words and ideas when our supervisor interrupted us and he drew this enormous scribble on the whiteboard. Suffering is like this, he said, pointing to the scribble. It is messy, it's ugly, it's chaos. Then he drew a box around that enormous scribble. When someone believes that God is testing them, or teaching them, or even sometimes punishing them through suffering, it contains it. In a way, it gives this suffering a framework. It gives it a purpose. Theodicy, he said, is one of the great mysteries of faith. None of us know why God really allows suffering. So if someone has an understanding of why they are suffering and that understanding helps them to find meaning, don't you dare walk into their hospital room and try to erase this box. My particular understanding of theodicy leads me to believe that God does not send plagues of snakes to attack tired, hungry bands of nomads for complaining about the provisions. But I can certainly understand how they would see it that way. And in any case, these snakes appear, and the Israelites come to Moses with repentant hearts. "We have sinned by speaking against the Lord and against you," they say. "Pray to the Lord to take the serpents away from us." And that's when it gets really weird. Acting under God's instructions, Moses makes an image of a snake out of bronze and puts it on top of a pole. Anyone who is suffering from a snake bite looks up at this snake on a stick and survives the venomous bite. Frankly, it sounds a little superstitious to me. Before the advent of modern science and modern medicine, and sometimes even now, there were all kinds of superstitious beliefs about the influence of the gaze and sight. People believed that the characteristics of babies, human and animal, were formed by what their parents were looking at during the moment of conception and the pregnancy. A hair lip was said to be caused by the mother seeing a rabbit, for instance. There's also a moment in Genesis when the trickster Jacob takes advantage of this belief that looking at something will influence the characteristics of the baby, and he uses that to steal a lot of animals from his father-in-law. Many cultures still have superstitions about the evil eye, that you can curse someone or bring misfortune upon them by looking at them in a particular way. So it's not surprising to hear that people in the ancient Near East, the Israelites, believed that looking at a bronze snake could miraculously heal a snake bite. But it is a little bit surprising to find it in the Bible. The Bible, which so often speaks of God's sovereignty, which so often proclaims that our help comes from God alone. The Bible with its famous condemnations of superstition and sorcery. The Bible which earlier in this very wilderness narrative told us the story of the faithless Israelites turning to another metallic animal for salvation, the golden calf. But in this ancient story, with its puzzling similarities to stories of idolatry, the people of Israel must have seen something important, must have heard a word about how God works in the world. It must have meant something to them, because they kept telling it, passing it down from generation to generation. It must have meant something to them because they kept not only the story, but also the bronze serpent, which according to 2 Kings was displayed in the temple until it was disposed of as possibly an idol in Hezekiah's reform. I don't know for sure what they saw in this text, but I see an invitation to a change of perspective, and perhaps a change of posture. We find the complaining Israelites angry and downcast, complaining and grumbling. They are more focused on their immediate discomfort than on the sweeping story of liberation that they are living out. They seem to have conveniently forgotten that they have been brought out of slavery. They have forgotten that the bread they are complaining about is a miracle. They have forgotten God's promises to them. As far as they are concerned, God and Moses are the problems. Not until these snakes arrive do the Israelites start to look at their own behavior. Perhaps the snakes come from God, but certainly this moment of crisis leads them toward reflection and repentance. And when that happens, when they turn to God for help, these complainers and grumblers, this community which has been scornful and dismissive of the blessings in their lives, they are invited to look up. God has Moses make this object that will physically cause them to lift their eyes. They are invited to look up and live. It's a change It's a change of perspective. It's a story that reminds us that our outlook and our attitude can make at least a little bit of a difference. It's a story that reminds us that we will never see what God is doing in us and through us if we insist on staring glumly at our own feet. Recently, I heard an interview with a 17-year-old young woman named Talia Lehman, who is the founder of a website called randomkid.org. As a 10-year-old in 2004, Talia wanted to help with relief after Hurricane Katrina. She'd seen it on the news. She found it very troubling. But she thought maybe she wouldn't be able to do much because she said, just a random kid. Talia started collecting spare change around the neighborhood. She trick-or-treated for Katrina relief. And her campaign caught the attention of the local media and began to grow and grow and grow. Talia's fund was in the top 10 donors to Katrina relief. She raised over $10 million. And now she runs this website that provides support to random kids who want to change the world. She still insists that she is, in her own words, a random kid. But her perspective on what it means to be a random kid has changed. Now, when she says a random kid, it's an expression not of her own powerlessness, but of the capacity of every person to do extraordinary things for the common good. It's about a change of perspective from looking down to looking up, from our own feet to the sky and the horizon, from the present crisis to the long arc of history that bends toward justice. However, this isn't about starry-eyed optimism. It isn't about escapism or denial. Even as the Israelites look up, even as they change their attitude, they look up toward an image of a snake, the very danger that is afflicting them. Even as they look up, look out, look toward the future, perhaps, they keep that present reality in view. And I think there's an important lesson there as well. The self-help industry, and unfortunately a sizable chunk of Christian spirituality, is full of think and grow rich kinds of promises. Promises that you can turn your luck around with the power of positive thinking or the law of attraction. But that's not what Christian faith is about. It's not a superstitious faith that sees God as our special good luck charm, like a horseshoe or a rabbit's foot. It does not promise that every disease will be miraculously cured, every financial strain miraculously relieved, every troubled relationship miraculously reconciled. Faith does not promise that through Christ our troubles and problems will vanish, and we will all have good health, great jobs, full bank accounts, smooth sailing. Rather, faith invites us to see our own crises, big and small, in the context of a greater story. Jesus actually models this in the gospel reading today when he recalls this story of the bronze snake and uses it to talk about his crucifixion. He acknowledges the painful reality of his impending death on the cross, and also sets that atrocity in the broader reality of God's story of liberation, redemption, resurrection, and grace. He uses this story to talk not just about present pain, but also about a hopeful future. He invites us to live not in fear, but in hope. Today, as we prepare to bring forward our pledges of support for this congregation in the year to come, the story of changing perspective feels especially apt to me. Because I do believe change our posture, to live in hope rather than in fear. College professor Randy Pausch, faced with terminal cancer, offered a last lecture to his students about everything he'd learned about living a good life. And that lecture became a book that has touched millions of lives. And then he prioritized spending the rest of the time that he had with his family. He gave of himself, and he lived in hope, not in fear. The congregation, this congregation, in 1969, had a building on 56th and Broadway, and we were in desperate need of a new roof. We had the money to make that repair. It would have taken a lot of money. But this congregation felt called to give of itself, to use that money to do mission in the world. And so this congregation sold that building and became a church without walls, entering into ecumenical partnerships with churches throughout the Upper West Side until we found a home here, in our 40-year covenant with Advent Lutheran Church. We lived in hope, not in fear. Over the course of the giving campaign that has been running for about the last month, I've talked to more than one congregant who told me that they had decided to pledge in the midst of financial struggles because they find that giving in that way, whether it's of time or financially, is life-giving for them. That committing to this community in that way makes a difference. They choose to give even though it's not easy, and that is a way that they live, these people who talk to me, in hope, not in fear. Living in hope doesn't mean living in denial of the problems and struggles and afflictions of this world and our lives. Living in hope does not mean falsely believing that the future will be perfect or easy or exactly what we would choose. Living in hope doesn't mean expecting supernatural miracles or life without pain, but it does mean something. It means trusting that God is present with us in the bad times as well as good. It means looking for grace and love